Welcome, Anna, and welcome to the Turban Gathering.
Yes, thank you.
The Sisterhood.
And this is our segment where we talk about Feminist Legal Clinic, our story. And welcome to you, Bronwyn, as also a committee member of the Feminist Legal Clinic and a practicing solicitor of Feminist Legal Clinic. So I think
thank you so much.
That both of us should be here.
We're honoured, absolutely honoured. Now, the first question I'd like to ask you is, when did you decide to take up law as a profession?
Well, straight from school. I got the mark, and I'd always been a humanities student. That was really my thing, to go straight into. I did a combined arts law degree. I did a psychology major in my Bachelor of Arts, and yeah, straight into law. And I haven't regretted it. I mean, much as I detest the legal system and the legal profession, I still find it's of great interest to me. Yeah.
And it's interesting that you did psychology as the arts component of your degree, because I think we talked about this earlier. It's kind of important to have a little bit of a psychology training and background when you're dealing with clients, which is missing from a straight law degree, which is what I did.
Isn't it? It's very important. I mean, when you're doing the sort of work that I did, which was always, I started off in criminal law, and then I moved into civil law, lots of personal injury, and later on, of course, working in women's legal services, you start doing a bit of family law. There was always a fair bit of domestic violence in each of those areas of law. It comes up in everything, really.
And you started off with the Aboriginal Legal Service?
Legal Service, yep. As a graduate, that was my first job as a qualified solicitor. I was with the Aboriginal Legal Service in Redfern. I was in their prison unit, was my first posting. And I was also a locum in their criminal law section, which meant that I filled in at the different criminal courts around Sydney. So I got to know lots of different courts, and I was used to always being out of my comfort zone, because you're always somewhere where nobody knows you. You're always the new kid off the block. And Aboriginal Legal Service, there wasn't a lot of supervision. There was no preparation. You'd find out the day before which courts you'd be going to the next day. You'd grab the files. You'd only have that evening to prepare. So it was very much thrown in the deep end, and in all jurisdictions too, because I did a lot of Supreme Court bails because of my involvement in the prison unit. So, quite serious matters. So yeah, it was everything's been easy since, in some ways. Yeah.
Excellent grounding. I'm actually kind of envious.
I'd recommend it, but you need nerves of steel.
Yes, well, and it's good to get those nerves of steel going early in your professional career. So you worked with some women's legal services after the Aboriginal Legal Service.
Look, after Aboriginal Legal Service, I went travelling. I was took a welcome break, and I worked as a legal journalist in the United Kingdom. And when I came back to Australia, I took a job with Redfern Legal Centre. Okay. And then I had another child. I kept having children. I had a child while I was over in England, and then I came back, did Redfern Legal Centre, had another child. Then I worked for Shopfront Youth Legal Centre in King's Cross. Then I had another child. Wow. I worked for Law Access, I think, for a bit. And I was also lecturing at that stage at UTS. And then I had another child. It's a bit like that. And then,
you're making me tired even listening to this.
It's good. I have to say I get bored. I like variety. So it suited me quite well. I wasn't, once you've done 6 months in a job, you kind of learn everything. Time to move on. And then I took quite a few years break, and then I came back as the supervising solicitor at Women's Legal Services. I think I've missed out a few services in there. There's quite a few other legal centres that I also volunteered for. They were sort of the paid positions, the main paid positions, but I volunteered in a lot of legal services kind of while I was having children, just to keep my skills going. But yeah, the last one was Women's Legal Services as a supervising solicitor. Yeah. And then after that, I set up Feminist Legal Clinic. Yeah. So
what motivated you? Like, you obviously had a massive amount of experience at that point, so it was like, I'll just do this for myself now.
Well, I'd worked out that I I wanted to focus on women, that the workforce isn't really structured in our favour,
No.
and all that goes with, you know, that role, and how difficult it is for women with children in particular.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So that, I think, so I had decided that's what I wanted to focus on. And so when I moved on from Women's Legal Service, I thought, well, I'll just set up my own. That's, I mean, it was quite a bit of thought. I was doing a bit of work with women's services like the Women's Library and things like that, kind of getting some of the skills that I needed to then set up my own incorporated association, because I hadn't set up a charity before. So that I learned some of those skills volunteering at the Women's Library in Newtown.
Yeah.
I'm still on the management. Oh no, actually I'm now their public officer, but I have until last year been on the management committee there, and you know, recommend that people check that place out.
Just run us through the logo.
Yeah, well, I just thought about what I would like as a logo. I wanted something that represented sort of feminists through the ages, and I thought about the witches, the wise women of old. So the broomstick and the cat is a reference to that. And the blue stockings, I don't know if you can always see that in all versions. She's got blue stockings on, and of course the overalls, the headscarf. Of course, she's obviously modelled on Lady Justice, so she's holding the scales like Lady Justice, but instead of a sword, I never like the sword because I'm a bit of a pacifist. So she's got the broom instead of the sword. She's going to clean up the mess that men have made. So yeah. Oh, the headscarf. So instead of Lady Justice is blind, so she can actually see. I think a man put that blindfold on Lady Justice. I think that's the problem. So she's instead lifted it up so it covers her head, and she looks a bit like Rosie the Riveter, who I don't know if Rosie the Riveter she's kind of, for the younger generation, they seem to think she's a feminist icon. I'm not quite so, I think it was a war recruitment poster, wasn't it? But anyhow.
I think it was to get women into the workforce while their husbands were at war.
Yeah.
So that was the idea, I think.
I know that, my son's friend, he asked her to dress up as a feminist for a film he was making, and that's what she put on. Okay. There was a bit of debate about that, about the colours. We wanted her to be also green and purple, and some versions I've managed to get someone to change the colouring to be green and purple. But yeah, my daughter did it for me. I kind of worked out what I wanted, and I don't have the skills. And I said, look, this is what I want. And so she managed to do that, and it was given to me as a birthday present. Yeah.
Fantastic. No, and the little black cat. I love the little black cat as well.
I love the cat. I've had past committee members who weren't so keen on cats. Not everybody's loved the logo.
Obviously, you work solely with women, and that's the focus of Feminist Legal Clinic. So what's the most important aspect of the work you do? And I mean, what sort of women are you mostly helping, and what sort of challenges are you facing with the work that you do?
Yeah, well, I'm on the panel with Legal Aid. I'm actually on most of the panels by now. I'm on criminal, civil, family law, but to be honest, I really just do the domestic violence work, because that way I can just act for women. So when you go to the safe room in the court, the Diva Case service, I'm kind of rostered on that at the moment, Parramatta Local Court. And I've done quite a few different courts. I've done the Downing Centre and Waverley and Newtown, and I've done a few different courts. But I have a rocky relationship with Legal Aid. But the domestic violence work I do comes through that channel. But the other work that I do is the discrimination, the human rights work. And in some ways, I think that's even more valuable because there's no one else doing that work, not the particular cases that we're bringing, where we're defending women against claims made against them. As people are probably aware, claims being made when women maintain women's sex-based rights. So that I'm not aware of any other community legal service that will take on those cases and who get it. But yeah, so domestic violence, I mean, obviously our constitution says that we assist women who are impoverished, in distress. Certainly women can't, almost all the women that we help struggle to obviously pay the cost of private legal representation.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's women are significantly disadvantaged in the legal system because of that. You've just outlined, how your sort of career was maybe a little bit impeded by the fact that you have a heap of children, and I know exactly how that feels. I have 4 children as well, and you just it's in fact a sex-based disadvantage.
Oh, it is. I mean, I did a few job share positions. One of my job share positions, so at Shopfront Youth Legal Centre, which is run by Freehills, actually, the big firm. But
really?
You'd go to court and I'd be trying to list a matter and you'd say, Your Honour, I'm only available on these days of the week. And it wasn't popular. It's a very inflexible profession, although mostly it worked quite well. I mean, I think there's actually more opportunity for job sharing than people realise, but there's some old-fashioned attitudes out there.
I think they're going to persist forever, the old-fashioned attitudes. Now,
down we know you've had. Don't say forever, Bronwyn. Don't say forever. I'm
hopeful.
We've got to change this. We've got to turn this around. Yeah,
hopeful but realistic, I suppose, is the best way to. Oh, look, I'll be fighting, until the bitter end, I tell you. Now, you've had some significant challenges recently, which I think everybody knows about. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about them with the council and your own problems with legal aid?
Yeah, well, we did that wonderful event at the at the University of Sydney, where we had panelists, including one who was a detransitioner, talking about what the future holds. And that event, of course, there were protests at that event. And following that event, what happened, and I mean, we didn't know this specifically at the time, but I've done a Freedom of Information or GIPA request since, and we've got all the correspondence. But what happened is that the Gender Centre wrote an email to staff at the City of Sydney Council saying, oh, look, Feminist Legal Clinic are promoting the Women's Declaration, the Declaration of Women's Sex-Based Rights, and they've got an accommodation grant from the City of Sydney. What are the implications for them? And that was it. That was the email, and that was all to set everything else in train. So it's interesting because so many women hundreds of women wrote personal letters in support of our service when we alerted them, our members and our supporters and clients. Loads of people wrote. There were petitions with thousands of signatures. There were some letters. There was one letter that had 900 signatures, but even just loads and loads of local women wrote letters, and it didn't make any difference whatsoever. It wasn't even acknowledged really by the councillors at their meeting where they determined that we should be closed down. There was no procedural fairness involved. They pointed to our website as the reason for closing us down. We have a news digest where we republish articles that have already been published. They identified 3 that were causes for concern, but they weren't interested in actually discussing that in any detail. And we hid those 3 articles, but it didn't make any difference. I think they were determined to close us down. So, and in the event, it really, in the end, I did a calculation that we would hopefully get some publicity, and we did. It was difficult. We only got publicity. Unfortunately, again, that was only the right-wing media, which is disappointing. I mean, the Sydney Morning Herald wrote one piece, was rather biased. Sky News provided us with coverage. I mean, it's very concerning to me that the ABC didn't cover our situation. But we got quite a lot of media attention out of it. I mean, actually, we got an upswing in donations, and it wasn't all bad at all. And I'd kind of made it. I mean, our lease only had another year to run and was going to expire. And of course, in the normal course of events, it probably would have been renewed. But I mean, the way things were going, I could see that wasn't going to happen in any case. Frankly, with COVID, the loss of the office hasn't been a huge tragedy, considering the difficulties with even operating an office at the moment with all the lockdowns. So I think, it wasn't worth any sort of legal action because there was only a year to run on the lease. So I think what we got out of it, which was a bit of publicity, was actually the best outcome. I would have liked to have thought that we might have been able to influence Clover Moore and the other councillors, but they seem to be really very beholden to the trans lobby. And the only thing I did get some movement from them, but only when the Daily Telegraph ran an article about it. And when that got a bit of coverage, and I then got a phone call that morning, the morning that it was in the Daily Telegraph, I got a phone call offering some sort of reprieve, whether I needed more time. Someone said to me after, I should have said, yeah, I could do with another year. But we'd already moved. Well, I probably should have. I mean, I must say I didn't think. I said, no, I don't need more time to move my things. I need you guys to relent and don't do this. But I mean, we'd already moved all our filing cabinets and furniture, so it was a little bit late. I wasn't really inclined to move everything back in to take up this wonderful offer, which it makes you a bit cynical that they only contacted us when there was an article in the Daily Telegraph. So the hundreds of letters that they received, people went to, some of them from people from all walks of life. We had senators like Claire Chandler, and we had professors, a number of university professors wrote, and we had many people, and as well as just clients, just very ordinary people writing, going to the trouble of picking up a pen and saying, how we'd help them. It's sad that none of that moved them, but an article in the Daily Telegraph did. And I guess that tells you how the world works.
Okay, well, let's so clearly pretty much every government and institution is captured by the whole gender identity ideology and movement. And I sometimes think about it from like a sociological sort of psychological basis. How do you think that's happened? Like, I'm an older woman, and I've seen rights that we had when I was younger being wound back now, and young women are just standing back and watching it happen, and they just, I completely do not understand it. What do you think is happening, in the sort of the mind of the general public? Well, how are they doing this?
Yeah, well, I mean, unfortunately, it doesn't say a lot for the mind of the general public. I didn't think that they could be conned to this extent.
No.
I think how it's happening is that it's well orchestrated, and I think there's big money behind it. I mean, you can see that it's happening on a global basis, and it's terribly well done. I mean, the same legislation is being pushed through all around the world at the same time, and we've all seen that Denton's document, which we all know that it is being done in a very well organized way, and they can do that because they have money, and yet they can still make it look like a grassroots movement because they're able to buy grassroots organizations so easily.
Yeah.
Give $20,000 to the Australian Breastfeeding Association, and they suddenly get rid of the word
chest
mother,
feeding,
chest feeding, and so that's how it's happening. The fact that so many people go along with it, even people that I previously had respect for, I think it's a lot of it is about cult psychology and group psychology. The fact that people don't want to, they just don't want to be out on their own. And I guess it makes you look at those psychological experiments like the Ash conformity experiment and the Milgram experiments. Those of us who've done psychology degrees,
they're
really true. People will just put aside their own judgment because they don't want to stand out from a group. So they'll ignore the evidence of their own senses rather than the embarrassment of being unpopular and saying something unpopular. And it's a real indicator of what people are made of, seeing how they respond to this. And it's, we should all be proud that we fall into this minority of people who can still be rational under pressure.
Well, it's also, like you and I both have 4 children. When I sort of started reading about, the transitioning of small children and the administration of hormones and surgeries to minors, my first thought was, how can any parent think that's a good idea? Like, really? But they seem to think it's like they've got, doctors like Michelle Telford cheering them on, and they think it's wonderful. And it just completely bamboozles me that parents have been captured as well. And even teachers who are sort of teaching small children have been taken in by all this. So, and they should know better, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, the faith that people place in the medical profession is extraordinary, in my view. I mean, I was raised, I guess, by a mother who was always very cynical took us very rarely to doctors and really didn't put a lot of stake in what doctors said. I'm not saying that that's always right, but I guess I if I see a doctor, I always check it myself, whatever, if they give me a diagnosis or prescribe me something, I will do a bit of Google doctor to, I think, I know there's hazards in that, but there's hazards also in not exercising a little bit of judgment of your own. And it worries me that people, especially when it comes to something like giving your children medications that have lifelong irreversible effects, if you're not doing some of your own research, but it depends. But there's really quite educated people who are doing this. You can understand that a lot of people rely on what the doctor says, but blindly.
Okay, I know it's like I scratch my head constantly. But we spoke just previously about the anti-discrimination cases that you take on. Now, are you able to tell us a little bit about the current ones that are happening and past ones?
Bronwyn,
Yeah.
We've got a hearing on next Thursday.
Okay.
So watch this space. There'll be more to talk about after that. Yeah. And that's probably the one that we can talk about. There's others.
Yes, I know.
Something specific.
Well, just without naming names, it's clear that these women are up against it. And I think
and a lot of the matters, we do a lot more matters that people probably don't hear about, because some matters fall over, and that's what we want. We want when we write a letter. So, for instance, if someone is being disciplined by a university body or a health regulatory body or disciplinary body, sometimes when we get involved and we just write a letter, that it sort of falls over by itself. And that's a great success, but there's not much to tell about, especially because the client doesn't necessarily want the whole thing publicized, even if it went in their favor. It's not everybody is willing to go public talking about it, unfortunately. Sporting tribunals, this sort of thing. So there's little cases, little skirmishes happening all the time. And in a sense, if you don't hear about them, it's good news, because it probably means that it fell over. And we've got one at the moment with the Australian Human Rights Commission, a complaint by a trans activist against a group. And some of you might be familiar with what's happening, but I can't really talk about it. But it's to be hoped that it falls over, in which case I won't have anything to tell you, but that will be a success. If it doesn't fall over and we end up in the federal court, well, then we'll all hear about it.
Might not be a bad thing. I know it's a good thing for the person who's being harassed, basically, but if it does fall over, but the law needs to be refined somehow. There's such disparity between the various state anti-discrimination laws and the federal law, and a lot of inconsistencies. And I think that needs to be ironed out, like sooner rather than later. And I think it will take, a court challenge to do that.
Yeah, the trouble is there's no guarantee that a court challenge will result in the correct outcome. I think there's this idea that if you go high enough, you'll get justice. But that's not necessarily the case. And the High Court's made some decisions in the past which make it very unclear which way they would go if it goes that far. So, it's a risky game, because then if you get a precedent at that level, then we're all in trouble. But sometimes I think the decision in the end will be taken out of our hands, because if you have to defend a matter, if you're in this situation. So obviously it depends on the client. The client has to make that judgment call, and sometimes, unfortunately, it can take too big a toll. People sometimes just don't want to keep going because of the stress involved, the risks involved, the expense involved. Our service is pro bono, but there are other expenses involved sometimes, and there's other costs to people. People, it affects their employment. So it's tricky.
You're right, it's a game of attrition, but it always has been.
We're listening to this, we know that there's a lot of women working in this space in different ways.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, aside from legal work, of course, all the submissions and the letter writing, hopefully all of it, what is it? It's like that analogy with raindrops, hopefully eventually it will have an impact. We just need to keep plugging away and not give up.
Yeah, well, absolutely, yes, because I have granddaughters now. I have like little girls that I have to worry about, and I am sincerely worried about their future. I think, what is the world going to hold for them? It's completely unknown now. Like it used to be, I suppose 20, even 30 years ago, women were heading sort of on an upward trajectory, and now they're being pulled back down. Like you can't do that, that's you're aspiring too high,
Yeah, well, that's right. All the women's services, things like women's refuges and court support services, and all of those things are under attack, really. I mean, I don't know how much longer we're going to be able to keep hold of any female-only service. I mean, look, Leichhardt Women's Health Centre.
I know.
And they've just apologised for publishing on their website, aside from the article from J.K. Rowling, and also that very important article that was on the Sydney Morning Herald on the front page about the health researchers who talked about the damaging impact of language which erases women. And they've taken that off their website and apologised for it. So I'm wondering whether they did that because they had pressure from their funding bodies.
Probably.
I'd like to know, how much it took for them to do that. But unfortunately, every time a women's service does that, capitulates like that, it just makes it harder for the rest of us.
Okay, and so Anna, I believe you're receiving an award at this Turban gathering. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, I think it's the Eva Bacon Award, and I've had to read up about Eva Bacon, but she sounds like she was a wonderful woman who made very significant contributions. Apparently, she was an atheist and a socialist, and as well as being a feminist, she was involved in anti-nuclear activism as well. And she was 5 foot tall. They called her the Mighty Mouse. So it seems like I've got some things in common with her. She was also a fashion designer, so I probably don't have that much in common with her. But a lot of the important things I think I have in common with her. I'm very grateful for the women here in Brisbane thinking that I was worthy of this very important award. So thank you very much for that.
You absolutely are very, very worthy. You're doing some magnificent work. I am totally in awe of you, Anna. I get messages from you at 5 in the morning and midnight, and I think, does this woman ever sleep?
I think that's to do with menopause, Bronwyn. My erratic sleeping hours. It's not so like that I don't sleep, but I have disrupted sleep. And I'm reading Germaine Greer's The Change at the moment, and I understand.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Say before we go as well, if you look at this lovely painting behind me, this is most of you of the Turban ladies will know Jo Pinkowitz. This is one of her original artworks.
Thank you, Bronwyn, that you've given to Feminist Legal Clinic, coming on our management committee at a time of dire need, because we through all these various crises that we've experienced, we have shed management committee members at quite a high rate at times, but you've been now a great constant, as has the rest of my management committee. I think we've actually had a very nice, stable management committee for the last couple of years, so that's been really good. So,
it has been since I've been on board, so it's fabulous.
Yeah, and I wonder whether people are aware of all the wonderful people that we have on our management committee, because there are 7 of us, and all make a very important contribution.